On the same day that AMD's Ryzen 9 7950X processors reached the shelves, Intel introduced its 24-core Core i9-13900k, the first of its 13th generation Raptor Lake processors. The flagship products of the upcoming generation are the Core i9-13900k and Ryzen 9 7950X, and due to their proximity, PC builders must choose between AMD and Intel. With the Core i9-13900k now available, we can see how it compares to the data we received from the Ryzen 9 7950X review. Our findings demonstrate that this generation's finest processor is highly competitively available. So, curious to know more? Keep watching till the end. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. In this video, we'll compare the Intel Core i9-13900k versus Ryzen 9 7950X to see which is the best. Stay tuned till the end of the video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. With that being said, let's dive into our topic. Let's begin with price and accessibility. On September 27, 2022, the same day Intel unveiled the Core i9-13900k, AMD debuted the Ryzen 9 7950X. It has a $700 adjusted retail price, and it appears to be stuck there for the time being. It differs from the widely successful Ryzen 7 5800X3D, whose price surged right after it was released before leveling off at its retail price. On October 20th, the Core i9-13900k was delivered. In this iteration, Intel is maintaining the same pricing for the Core i9-12900k, with the new component coming in at $589. That price is a little bit optimistic because the Core i9-12900k typically went for roughly $620. However, even at that cost, the Core i9-13900k is still considerably less expensive than the Ryzen 9 7950X. Overall, Intel's portion will cost you about $100 less, possibly even $120. Additionally, the Core i9-13900k supports previous generation 600 series motherboards with the appropriate BIOS update. And if you have a 600 series board that supports DDR4, you can use DDR4 RAM. As a result, the Core i9-13900k's overall platform cost is significantly lower than the Ryzen 9 7950X's. Specs. On paper, the Core i9-13900k appears to destroy the Ryzen 9 7950X, but the reality is a little different. The Core i9-13900k combines performance cores and efficiency cores just like the previous generation. Despite increasing the number of cores, the E-cores don't scale performance in the same way because they aren't nearly as powerful. However, as we observed in our Core i9-12900k's review, they unquestionably aid in multitasking. The Core i9-13900k offers 24 total cores, divided into 8 P-cores and 16 E-cores. In contrast, the Ryzen 9 7950X has 16 cores. Despite having more cores overall than the Intel processor, the E-cores cannot support hyper-threading. That indicates that each part will have 32 threads. The cache is the other important standard. You get a total of 68 MB split between L2 and L3 cache from Intel, perhaps in response to AMD's 3D V-cache technology's superior gaming performance. However, AMD still holds a little advantage in this area with the Ryzen 9 7950X's 8 MB overall cache. The Core i9-13900k has twice as much L2 cache as AMD's component, but AMD concentrates that cache more in L3. Even though we could compare specs indefinitely, the truth is that performance is ultimately determined by design and architecture. Power is the only objective metric we can compare, and it's now considerably closer than it formerly was. AMD increased the platform's power to 230 watts, which brings it closer to the Core i9-13900k's maximum power of 253 watts. Performance. The previous several generations had an obvious performance leader, but not anymore. In the majority of apps, the Ryzen 9 7950X and Core i9-13900k face off head-to-head in fierce competition. Although Intel claims a very slight advantage in single-threaded performance, the Core i9-13900k's increased core counts enable it to handle multi-threaded activities substantially better. The Core i9-13900k dominates the charts for apps, but the Ryzen 9 7950X isn't far behind. In certain instances, like the Firestrike test from 3D Mark and 7-Zip, the Ryzen 9 7950X takes the lead. The Core i9-13900k is for you if you demand greatest performance regardless of the margin. But the Ryzen 9 7950X offers very little in exchange. In games, you essentially lose nothing. Far Cry 6 favors the Ryzen 9 7950X, although Forza Horizon 4 favors the Core i9-13900k with a comparative advantage. Modern games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Cyberpunk 2077 are so graphically demanding that many of them do not distinguish between the two CPUs. The best processor is usually easy to determine, but this generation is difficult. With razor-thin margins, AMD and Intel are trading blows, putting a lot more emphasis on price. Although it may perform better in some applications, the Ryzen 9 7950X costs roughly $100 more than the Core i9-13900k. Motherboards and sockets. The Ryzen 9 7950X represents a significant shift for AMD. It no longer supports the AM4 socket AMD has been using since 2016, and now only supports the new AM5 socket. You will require a new DDR5 memory in addition to a new motherboard. AMD only offers DDR5 on Ryzen 7000 processors, not the Core i9-13900k. Although DDR5 is expensive, AMD anticipates a decrease in pricing soon. Intel continues to offer DDR4 and DDR5 variants of the majority of motherboards, maintaining its strategy from the previous generation. Although the Core i9-13900k supports both DDR4 and DDR5, you must purchase a motherboard that is compatible with the memory type you intend to utilize. Since Intel is using the same LGA 1700 socket, upgrading a computer built with a 12th generation processor shouldn't require purchasing a new motherboard. However, make sure to look at the support materials for your specific motherboard. Before installing the Core i9-13900k, 600 series motherboards require an updated BIOS. Regardless of the CPU you select, the majority of people will need to purchase a new motherboard, even though the Ryzen 9 7950X will cost you more. With the Core i9-13900k, switching to DDR4 or repurposing some existing memory could help you save money, but it all depends on your future upgrade plans. Aside from that, AMD and Intel both make great processors for productivity jobs like video editing and transcoding, while the mid-range CPUs from both AMD and Intel offer the best value. The Ryzen 7700X and Core i5-13600k are notable standouts. The flagship CPUs from both AMD and Intel provide the best performance in gaming and more taxing multi-threaded workloads. The best AMD CPU has a more conventional 16-core and 32-thread configuration, but the Intel Core i9-13900k has 24 cores, 8 plus 16, and supports up to 32 threads. In challenging games, both chips are neck and neck and they spar in professional settings. The 13900k takes first place when more entire cores can be used, whereas AMD is preferred by programs that depend on more potent individual cores. However, you don't have to spend the most to have a fantastic CPU for business or gaming. The Core i5-13600k from Intel, which costs roughly $300, is perhaps the most cost-effective CPU of its generation and provides incredible gaming and productivity performance. Performance-wise, AMD can compete with Intel, but for the time being, Intel snatches the middle value from AMD because the 7600X lags behind and the 7700X is more expensive. Additionally, last-generation CPUs are a viable option. AMD's Ryzen 5000 series processors are still quite powerful, and the 5800X 3D model in particular is amazingly competitive with even the most recent titles. However, the Ryzen 7000 requires a completely new motherboard and memory setup, making upgrades impossible. The 12600K, another excellent mid-range standout with a clear upgrade route to the 13th generation when you want it, is one of the Intel 12th generation CPUs, which are also excellent choices. Though you'll still be limited to the previous generation for the time being, both businesses also provide a wide selection of affordable CPUs. The great quad-core Core i3-12100F from Intel costs approximately $100, while the 6-core Ryzen 5 5500 from AMD costs about $120 and provides comparable gaming performance. Intel is your best choice if you're trying to construct an inexpensive system without discrete graphics. Even while AMD's new Ryzen 7000 CPUs have onboard graphics and its older APUs are still reasonably capable, they're more expensive. A Ryzen 5 5600G costs $150, whereas an Intel Core i3-12100 is roughly $120. You need a lot of processing power spread across a lot of cores if you want to utilize your PC for demanding video editing in high resolutions, video transcoding, or CAD work. The greatest mainstream CPUs are excellent choices for that. But if you require even more cores than the 13900K's 24 cores, you might want to think about a high-end desktop or HEDT CPU. The 24, 32, and 64-core Threadripper Pro CPUs from AMD support 2 times as many concurrent threads. Additionally, they enable 128 PCI Express lanes as opposed to the Intel counterpart's 44. The 64-core 5995WX costs thousands of dollars, but if you can speed up your job and increase your income utilizing one of these CPUs, it might be well worth it. Both AMD and Intel are good options if you want to game on your desktop. The 7700X and 7900X are excellent alternatives to the Core i9-13900k at the top of the market. Similarly, the Intel Core i5-13600K is nearly as excellent as all three and much less expensive. But don't ignore the AMD Ryzen 9 7950X from the previous generation, as it's competitive with all of them, even though its last generation design doesn't allow you to a viable upgrade path. It's too close to call for this generation. Based on our testing, the Core i9-13900k runs a little bit better, although it primarily depends on the application. And while some games favor AMD and others Intel, there is essentially no difference in the majority of game titles. In conclusion, even there isn't a clear victor, it's difficult to go wrong with either of these CPUs. The Core i9-13900k is the superior option for the majority of buyers. It is less expensive and makes use of DDR4 and a motherboard from the 600 series. Although the Ryzen 9 7950X is quite remarkable, it is a significantly more expensive option without a discernible performance boost because of its greater cost, pricey motherboards, and requirement for DDR5 memory. This concludes our discussion for today. So, which of them would you prefer and why? Tell us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and chime the notification bell to keep tabs on all our activities. Thanks for watching.